You have $650 million. Not on paper. Not tied up in some illiquid deal you're still waiting to close. $650 million sitting across a handful of accounts you couldn't fully list from memory if someone asked you to. And in about 4 minutes, you're going to stand in a checkout line and pay $4.50 for coffee with a card that has no name printed on the front of it. The cashier is going to glance at you exactly the way she glances at the next 40 people in line. Nobody in that store knows. Not the cashier. Not the man behind you complaining about the weather. Until 18 months ago, not even your own brother. That's not a hypothetical. That is a Tuesday for a man we're going to call Daniel. This isn't a video about how someone makes $650 million. It's about what it actually costs to make sure nobody ever finds out. Daniel drives an 11-year-old sedan with a small dent in the rear bumper he's never bothered to fix. He's lived in the same 2-bedroom rental for 6 years. At the firm where he technically still consults 4 hours a month, his title hasn't changed since 2016. None of that is an accident. Every piece of it was built the same way most people build a career, on purpose, one decision at a time. Daniel doesn't own anything in his own name. Not the car. Not the apartment lease, technically. What he owns is a chain of holding entities most people have never heard of, a trust drafted a decade ago by a law firm he's met in person exactly twice, and a family office 2 states away that manages more money than some small-town banks for a client they've physically met 4 times in 11 years. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Daniel is not rare. There are roughly 30,000 people on this planet holding $100 million or more in liquid assets. Close to 11,000 of them live in the United States. Ask the average person to name 5 of them, and they won't get past 2. That's not a failure of research. That's the design working exactly the way it was supposed to. But staying invisible at this level isn't luck, and it isn't paranoia either. It's a full-time, unpaid job with exactly 1 employee and 0 days off. Now here's where it almost fell apart. Last spring, Daniel had dinner with Marcus, his college roommate from 20 years ago. Marcus does the kind of quiet math people do at dinner without meaning to, the 10-year-old car in the parking lot, the modest apartment Daniel mentioned in passing, the vague, still consulting, nothing exciting answer to, so, what are you up to these days? It doesn't add up to nothing. It also doesn't add up to $650 million. Marcus laughs it off, orders another beer, and never thinks about it again. He has no idea how close he just got. So, why does someone go to this much trouble? It's not paranoia. It's psychology, and it's worth understanding because a smaller version of it has already happened to you. Here's the mechanism. The moment another person learns your number, they stop reacting to you. They start reacting to the number. Every conversation after that gets quietly recalculated. What you meant by that comment, why you offered to pay, whether that favor was really a favor. You felt a small version of this yourself. Think about the last time a friend found out you got a raise, or a promotion, or sold something for more than they expected. Nothing about you changed in that moment, but something about the conversation did. People got a little more careful, a little more curious, a little less themselves. Now take that same mechanism and multiply it by 650 million. The fear underneath moments like this usually isn't that someone will exploit you. It's that you'll never again be fully sure whether you're being seen for who you are or for what you have. At Daniel's level, that uncertainty doesn't stay in the background. It becomes the loudest voice in every room he walks into. Daniel didn't build 11 years of silence to protect the money. He built it to protect himself from slowly turning into the number. The psychology explains why he wants to disappear. The mechanics explain how it's actually done, and some of what's legally possible right now would surprise you. Start with ownership. In the United States, as of a rule change that took effect in early 2025, a company formed inside the country is no longer required to disclose who actually owns it to the federal government. At all. Only foreign companies registering to do business in the U.S. still have to file that information, which means the simplest, most American way to disappear financially, an LLC formed in your own state, got easier to hide behind in the last 2 years, not harder. Layer a trust on top of that and a family office on top of the trust, and you get a structure where Daniel's name doesn't appear on a single asset he economically controls. Not the properties, not the investment accounts, nothing. But invisibility isn't just a legal convenience. For people at this level, it's also insurance, literally. Families like Daniel's quietly carry kidnap and ransom insurance, a real, multi-billion-dollar global industry that barely gets talked about publicly, for the obvious reason that talking about it publicly defeats the entire purpose. Insurers who underwrite these policies name the exact same risk factor over and over in their own research: visible wealth, media coverage, real estate in your own name, a social media presence that maps to a net worth. The quieter a family is statistically, the safer a family is. That's not a fear Daniel invented. That's a number insurance companies are willing to price. And if you think this only happens in fiction, it doesn't. There's a real businessman named Chuck Feeney who spent over a decade doing something close to this, not to hide from danger, but simply to hide, period. In 1984, he secretly signed away his roughly $500 million stake in the company he co-founded, Duty-Free Shoppers, to a foundation he controlled. His own business partners didn't know. In 1988, Forbes listed him among the wealthiest people in America, while he had already quietly given away control of nearly everything he had. Nobody found out until 1997, and only because an unrelated legal dispute forced the paperwork into the open. By the time he died in 2023, he had given away roughly $8 billion. He flew coach. He didn't own a house. He reportedly wore a $15 watch. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If hiding the money is this achievable, legally, quietly, for over a decade at a time, why does it cost so much to actually live that way? Here's the part nobody puts in the headline. The hardest thing Daniel ever hid wasn't the money. It was what the money did to every relationship he has left. Every conversation now carries a silent asterisk. Every gift, every offer to help, every "let me get this one" gets quietly filed under a question he can never fully answer. Would this still be happening if they knew? Most people assume wealth is for being seen: the watch, the car, the house that makes people stop and look. At Daniel's level, the entire equation flips. Invisibility isn't the price he pays for the money. Invisibility is the actual asset. Nobody can perform for him. Nobody can quietly resent him. Nobody can ask him for something they wouldn't ask a stranger for, because as far as they know, he is one. There was a woman he dated for almost 2 years. There was a night, close to the end, where he almost told her, not out of guilt, but because for the first time in a long time, it felt safe enough to consider. He didn't. Not because he was scared of what she'd do with the information. He was protecting the version of the relationship where she chose him, without ever needing a reason to. He built the silence to protect himself from becoming the number. What nobody warns you is that a person nobody fully knows is still, in his own quiet way, completely alone. So, why not just tell someone? Why not enjoy what took 2 decades to build? The answer says less about Daniel and more about anyone who's ever had something worth protecting. You will probably never manage $650 million. But the instinct underneath Daniel's entire life applies at every income level, and most people are doing the exact opposite of it for free. The median car owned by an actual American millionaire costs $31,367. Not a Porsche, not a G-Wagon, a Toyota or something like it. Real wealth in this country has almost never announced itself. Daniel is simply that principle taken to its most extreme, most disciplined form. So here's what actually transfers down. First, treat your financial information the way Daniel treats his. Privacy isn't secrecy born out of shame. It's a strategy. What you don't broadcast, nobody can borrow against, resent, or quietly expect from you. Second, separate who you are from what you're worth, starting now at whatever number you're currently at. That habit is nearly impossible to build after the number gets large. It's simple to build before it does. Third, build systems instead of an audience. Daniel's $650 million runs on automation, structure, and people he rarely has to speak to. That's the same instinct behind a $500 a month automatic transfer into an index fund. The scale is different. The discipline is identical. None of that requires a fortune. It requires deciding, this week, to stop performing a financial life you haven't actually built yet. Back to that checkout line. Daniel pays $4.50 for his coffee. The cashier says, "Have a nice day." He says the same thing back, and means it, and walks out to an 11-year-old sedan with a dent he still hasn't fixed. Nobody in that store will ever know what just walked past them. That was always the point. But somewhere between the trust documents and the family office and 2 decades of careful, deliberate silence, a different question was quietly being answered. One Daniel never says out loud, and one worth sitting with long after this video ends. It was never really about whether you could hide $650 million. It's about whether you could still let one person see you completely without it.